Hey guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Goethe, the person who is behind this channel. If you didn't prepare yourself for the fourth industrial revolution, I am thinking maybe you can start doing that right now. This podcast will actually give you an idea what fourth industrial revolution is all about, blockchain, and all the things that cultural practitioners need to understand and know about the future, because everyone is talking like we never really spoke about this, but this has been like there's been a lot of discussions about it. I hope you guys will enjoy this, and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't, because we're about to just have so much fun in this channel and just release more things. And this is very long video. This is a very long podcast. If you really want to take a break, you can take breaks in between, but it's very interesting because you will pick up one or two things from it. Let's educate each other and build a very healthy economy and a country. And I hope you guys enjoyed your Africa Day yesterday. And today, I hope you are looking forward to more things and to build a healthy Africa. And I'm actually sharing this podcast more like an event that I put together. We shot this event with a very great friend of mine, a creative moto. He did the sound, and they were talking about fourth industrial revolution and technology, and how technology is going to affect the cultural practitioners in future. I hope you guys will actually enjoy this podcast because it has so much information. I did this with Goethe. You will just find out more about Goethe in this. Please listen to the whole thing because you might miss one or two things. And right now, speaking of podcast, the next episode I'll be talking to Dillian Piri, who's a creative entrepreneur, founder of Creative Nestlings. We'll be talking about everything creative and nice things. Please listen to this podcast and subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and let me know what you think.
Welcome to the Cultural Economies Forum, and a very special welcome, may I say that, to our Russian and to our American friends. Where are the Russian and the American friends? Well, two of you are here. That's very good. Wonderful. I'm supposed to give a little bit of a context here of why we're doing this and what the broader element is. You may be aware that the Goethe Institute is currently supporting and managing various initiatives in support of cultural and creative industries. We do this in 3 African countries, namely in Senegal, in Kenya, and in South Africa. We also do this in 3 countries in the Middle East, namely Jordan, Palestine, and the Iraq. And we do this with wonderful funding, sometimes complicated funding, of the German Ministry of Cooperation and Development. And we do this in partnership with GIZ. So if you see the funny logo out there, that's GIZ. The nice logo, that's the Goethe Institute's logo, right? So you may be interested in what's happening in South Africa at the moment. And this is what the wonderful team at the Goethe Institute Project Office manages right now. 3 program strands. The first one is animation. Via the Cape Town-based organization Triggerfish, and I believe some of you have heard of Triggerfish, we just talked about that, we're building a platform to inform and to qualify creative people in the sector of animation film. Animation film is definitely a creative industry that is on the up and on the coming and needs all of support here in Africa. The cultural economies hubs in townships, something that I think you guys are involved at the moment, is a project strand where we're giving advice to creative talents in townships, as the name says, via local partners. And maybe you use the time to exchange with our guests from overseas on what's happening here today, or what's happening there. But the Cultural Economies platform is what this evening is all about. It's a platform, an online platform, an information platform that is, well, really starting and getting going now. And to get it going, it was decided that this evening was to be convocated in preparation for something that you may see on the screen very, very soon. i.e. the Fakugezi Festival. The Fakugezi Festival, as you probably know much better than me, is officially called the Fakugezi African Digital Innovation Festival. So we're scouting tonight for topics, for themes, for topics, for issues, for what is going to happen in September. Is this correct? Pretty much. I'm still online. So you're all scouts tonight, and with the wonderful panel, and under the guidance of our moderator, and that would be, there you are, sorry, Yellow Vest. Yes, I'm so Yellow Vest. Londi Langar, you should all be scouting for Fakugezi to help creative industries in South Africa and beyond. I wish you a wonderful evening, interesting exchanges, and perfect results for Fakugezi. All right.
Thank you, Klaus. Just a bit of what's happening today. Why is it happening today? The Creative Economies Platform with Fakugezi, African Innovation, Digital Innovation Festival, we are preparing for a conference in September. And this is a pre-conference dialogue, exchange, interchange, so that a broader community is able to inform what goes on thematically at the festival. So your interaction today will be very valuable in that sense. And then on other matters, we have these blue things that start here and go all the way to the back with different questions in them. And we really appreciate it maybe towards the end or the end of the forum to kind of reflect about the industry, not necessarily about this particular session, but after the talks and what you've heard, and engage about the industry broadly around the topics that are there, and their post-its and pens, and if you can just engage in that sense, because that will also help us in information gathering of what's relevant, what are people thinking about and interested in relation to the industry. More than that, I think I will have to hand over to our moderator, Londi Langa, who's a digital arts lecturer at WITS and also an entrepreneur in her own right. So yeah, Londi.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the first iteration of the Cultural Economies Forum. And I guess at this point in time, I just want to phrase this as a open discussion that is loosely framed around navigating and understanding around how policies are affecting us as professionals and practitioners on the ground. And it's mostly going to take the form of a reflective exercise, but one that we are hoping will encourage a great deal of conversation and start to get us framing far more pointed directions for the leading forum that's coming in September. So that much said, thank you for being here with us. And I guess I'll just start it off with framing the fact that we are in a really interesting moment in time as cultural practitioners, as professionals in our varied strokes and specifications and specialities. And that said, we are needing to really understand in depth what this moment really means for us when we talk about a shift in the digital space. The digital space is now shaping the new revolution. And what I mean by that is, I'm sure a lot of you have caught this phrase in passing called the fourth industrial revolution. So whether you are clued up on this phrase or not, or this term or not, I think this forum is going to really afford us a great deal of starting to at least bring this term a little closer to our everyday and understand what it means and how it manifests in our day-to-day practices as cultural practitioners. Why is it important for us as cultural practitioners to start having this conversation? Because outside of this conversation, we really, I mean, not to throw a negative spanner in the works, but we really will make ourselves obsolete if we don't really start engaging with what this means to us. So this forum really is about us really starting to simplify this really complex spectrum of advancements, technological advancements, and understanding what it means when we take it in bite-sized form and really start to think through it and understand what it's going to require of us on a day-to-day basis. And this partly means that as practitioners, we are all encountering this demand to shift and change and adjust to things on a policy level as well as on a level of understanding what it means to us patently, with regards to our intellectual properties, and understanding how then do we get the best value from our own hard work, from our own labor, and don't become the last people to have a say in that conversation. Okay, so I don't want to take up too much of the conversation and the time that we have limited for this conversation. And I'm going to go straight into introducing our first speaker, Isabel. If you could just give me a second to just reboot my system. So just to introduce my first speaker, Isabel Rook. Isabel is a multi-award-winning producer, is the co-founder of Amazing Workshop, which started in 2000 and officially came to an end in 2010, which led the way in innovative technology manipulation and addressed the shortage in Black and female skills. We know we need a lot of that. As well as multiple industry problems which previously prevented long-form animation from being produced in South Africa. And Amazing went to become one of the fastest-growing, highly innovative animation companies in Africa. Isabel is a sole owner and chief enabling officer of EPN, an executive producing company which, with a specialist focus on consulting for animation industry producing animation content. Isabel draws from a broad range of media experience and is currently consulting to the Timalokong Digital Innovation Precinct and Sky Code. EPN's company strategy relies on two pillars: differentiation and value innovation, and looks at various strategic approaches to project, company, and industrial development and production. I would also like to add that Isabel is also a volunteer and a board member for Animation SA. So over to you, Isabel.
Yeah, I speak loudly. Is it not strong enough for recording? Okay, sorry. Please don't ask me to start again. So yeah, I really want to innovate in this space, and I think when we put words like innovation into our titles, it forces us to put that in our thinking and our process. So to move on, So the local economy is, I mean, I think you all know this, but it's really a massive industry. I mean, when I saw the statistics on just Gauteng alone, 33.3 billion, it is a serious industry. And I don't think we're taken seriously enough, and that's what really frustrates me. So I was given 10 minutes, and so there's some slides that I'm not going to give that much time to. This is just segueing through to value chain, past, present, and future. It was really just a pretty picture to help segue to the next. I just really love the image. So the past. This is when you Google value chain on Google, is the old school value chain. This is what set up a lot of people for failure, and why a lot of content has resulted in just not getting the return. As you can see, distribution is at the end of the value chain, and a lot of filmmakers made the mistake of really only starting to think about their distribution strategies and their sales strategies and so forth when they reach post-production, which really is way too late, and I think has had a huge impact. And the fact that marketing was also at the end of the value chain is another problem. So in looking at how do we kind of innovate and just change this value chain, one of the things was bringing up a lot that's on the end of the value chain right up front to the beginning, so in development, and taking into consideration some of the developments that are happening right now. So, your IP needs a full-on strategy. What is your IP strategy? Your traditional Bible and script and so forth, but you're building a brand, and if we don't start defining that in our strategies, we'll continue just producing a product, and it's not a product. It has so many different potentials that if we don't give it that much thought up front and plan for that, it ends up getting lost in the whole craziness of the production process. Marketing, I think transmedia is one of the key tools to be used in marketing for any content, and I think what we can do in using transmedia to also incorporate social impact of how our content can have a social impact component that actually has a benefit to your content that kind of is woven into your marketing strategy. I think there's just so much that we can explore with transmedia and incorporating that into our development. Merchandise, licensing, and distribution. Once again, also the things put at the end of the value chain, which by the time filmmakers have released their films and dealt with their distribution, then they're like, oh, okay, we've got some characters, let's do some merchandising and licensing. It's really too late. You need your merchandisers up front while you're designing your characters to start saying this will work for a doll or a toy, tweak it, change it for thinking of what is the merchandising range. In fact, you should have your merchandising strategy written out of what are all the different apparel that this could work for, so that you can start designing accordingly. So yeah, going into pre-production, this is when we're starting to kind of get more into your finance plan, your IP development and funding, your scheduling, your normal. But one of the key things in this is starting to think about content repurposing. If we don't start thinking about in the entire value chain of this whole process, how are we going to repurpose the content as we're developing it, so that once we have our transmedia campaign in place, we're engaging with our audience throughout the journey, so that they're coming on the journey with us. By the time we reach the end of the value chain, we've built up an audience by having a marketing and transmedia strategy that's going along the journey. So sharing different tidbits along the way, behind the scenes videos, memes, prosuming, getting to a point where you're starting to interact and they giving some feedback and input into the content and feel that they're part of the creation as well. I think there's just been so many incredible developments in that. And yeah, then setting up your pre-sales and so forth, all up there, and of course your tax credits and so forth. The rest is all kind of normal, but once again, repurposing content, repurposing through the entire process, and then coming towards the end. By the time you've reached the end, your potential for success is so much higher. So the issue that we have to deal with this in terms of the present, so I mentioned the past and this is the future. The present is already we're dealing with the challenge of development is so expensive. There's so little funding for it. This adds to the cost of that. How do we start dealing with that? And I think that if we start accepting that This is a risk mitigator to ensure that we stop setting ourselves up for failure and start increasing the potential of our brands ending up as merchandise, that we start engaging with the key players that make that possible and make them realize the importance of that as opposed to chasing production. So this is another segue slide just to show pretty pictures of what South Africans are doing. I mean, each one of those, I could tell you a story about the concepts that is just so beautiful. It would just make your heart melt. So, onto something a little scary. So, intellectual property and copyright challenges. This is a serious David and Goliath issue. I mean, here's a few examples of what Disney has done over the years to various content. You know, the Little Mermaid that we all, you know, when we were teenagers were listening to, well, they stole a lot of that from the Little Shop of Horrors. Cars, Doc Hollywood, Inside Out, which my kids love, and it's so heartwarming and beautiful, but the woman, the mother who created Moodsters is still in court fighting Disney over the theft of that. Atlantis, this was the first time I realized Disney's thievery was many years ago in my studio. Somebody showed me the Japanese version of Atlantis and what they had created, and they didn't have the money to fight Goliath, so they just put the images up on the website and did the comparison so you could see just how much it was a ripoff. Aladdin, Up, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dinosaur. I mean, there's so many. And then even myself, you know, when preparing for Lieve Hexie, Disney asked Ster-Kuniko if they could recommend one company in South Africa that they could co-produce with. And Ster-Kuniko recommended my studio, and we submitted all our artwork to Disney. And a year later, still silence. And 2 years later, I saw all the artwork in Thumbelina. So how does David take on Goliath in this kind of dangerous era that we live in? So it's a really incredible issue that we're dealing with. So, you know, I agreed to take on this talk because I was just like, I really want to change the dialogue around this. I want us to start really looking at, you know, start calling the pot filthy. We are eating out of a filthy pot, and nobody is saying that this pot is filthy. Can we stop eating out of it? We took on a legal system during an apartheid era that was designed by the rich for the rich to keep the poor down. We're now continuing that system into our time and then trying to make tweak changes to laws from 1978 that really are not designed for small SMEs trying to just keep the lights on and pay their bills. And now we've got lawyers blocking us from accessing IP, copyright, trademark, etc. And I was like, we're living in the era of disruption. Can we start the debate and the discussion around how do we start changing this? How do we start disrupting in it? So in researching on blockchain and looking at, you know, what opportunities exist in this and how can we start looking at changing and getting the middleman out of the way. And, you know, there are people coming up with brilliant inventions and concepts and creative stuff, and they're blocked from funding because the funders won't allow, how much time? 5 minutes. 2 minutes. Okay. So, so what I've proposed is for Fagogezi this year, we will be hosting a hackathon that's going to be looking at how can we use blockchain to deal with some of the challenges we're dealing with in IP, copyright, etc. I'm going to have to move faster. So I can't go into this. This is just when you Google digital disruption of the legal system, it's happening all over the world. It's so exciting. And I have a beautiful video. I wish I had time to show you. It's so funny. But yeah, to just take a couple of things out of this. Technology is evolving faster than policy and regulation, and new issues arise which necessitate new laws. The IT advisor to the Chief Justice in the UK believes that the legal profession has 5 years to reinvent itself from being traditional legal advisors to being legal technologists. So yeah, it's the trend and the change is happening, and we need to ensure that it starts here. Yeah, this was the video I wanted to show you. It's hilarious. So yeah, Google that and check it out later. I won't have time to show you. So yeah, then I was also asked to speak on animation in South Africa, comparisons to the global north and the African continent. People must think I speak at high speed, because how am I gonna, this is a massive, am I over time? You see, like, oh, I have overtime, oh, thank you. Okay, cool. So this is a whole massive topic in itself, but fortunately, I can announce some good news about this. We have secured funding, which I've spent 1.5 years sourcing for market research, and thank you to GIZ for approving that funding. And we also managed to negotiate with the International Global Research Company for a 75% discount, so we can afford to get the global research as well. So just to give you some highlights in terms of comparisons with South Africa. So animated CGI films have been at the top grossing films at the box office year on year for the past few years, many years. India has transformed itself from being a destination of cost arbitrage to a destination of quality arbitrage. And South Africa sits with the same potential. So, I was asked to look at Global North and look at Africa, but I really think that Global North is the wrong place to be looking. We need to be looking at India. It has so much more that is more in line with who we are and what we could learn. How they designed their industry from being nobody to suddenly being like the biggest industry. They just surpassed everybody and now are doing co-productions. They have the money to invest with Disney on the productions that they are doing the service work on. So they have just really grown into a powerhouse, and I think there's a lot we could learn in terms of developing our industry to that kind of level from them. So I'm more interested in analyzing those kinds of markets than, America and Europe. I don't think that they're the right fit, but in terms of who the majority of the industry are, they are positioning themselves for that European, because they are, descendants of European. But I think we need to also start shifting that dialogue around what are our challenges and what's the best way to kind of design that. So yeah, content has never been more in demand, particularly in the family genre. I mean, you've seen the just explosion of online. There's an African version of this that can be put together that's just as impressive. So it's really growing. So yeah, I just want to talk a bit around risk mitigation, because I think there's huge issues that are blocking us. I mean, if I could tell you the story of that Junkmation film, it is heartbreaking what happened to that. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful, created by filmmakers who used their chicken farm money to make this. It's made out of junk, and it is superb. But the legal and IP war that they were in was just a nightmare. It never saw the light of day. Very few people have seen that. I was lucky to be at a festival where it was playing. So yeah, in helping us prevent our industry from becoming the Titanic and really kind of, having all the potential for something great and then just sinking along the way because we're not looking at some of the huge issues that are going to prevent us from achieving that kind of success. So yeah, IP definitely a key one to look at. Business and technical. I mean, this is critical that, too many artists are running studios and we are not empowering these people with the correct business knowledge. And so knowledge is sitting with a few big studios who have that and have the resources, and we've got to start kind of ensuring that all studios start getting access to the right business information. Content development, yeah, there's just a whole discussion around that. I think that the time has come for us to start looking at the factory system. I think this whole kind of blocking the majority of young artists who cannot afford 80,000 rands a year for an animation school is just preposterous, that we start looking at how do we make people specialists. You will be a lip sync artist and you will be excellent at that. You will be a colorist, and we create departments of people who do not have to study the entire thing, but we can start creating jobs and start doing actual TV series in this country. We are actually outsourcing, and this is part of the market research that I want to get confirmed, is the two that I know. We're outsourcing 2 massive TV series out of the country, and we're turning down a lot of international work because we just don't have enough people. I mean, how ridiculous is that in a country with so much unemployed youth and so many talented African young people? So yeah, merchandise exploitation. I mean, in your business plan, the merchandising is the key to the success of your animation business. And then I just want to talk about government. If we have to put Section 12J, the DTI rebates, and Section O together, and government actually made that work, we de-risk investment into animation completely. And so an investor has zero risk in doing investment into this, but we need to start disrupting that. I say we look at how can we use blockchain and various technologies to get humans out of the way. I think there's a lot of emotional stuff that's getting in the way of those decisions, that once we start to, use artificial intelligence and algorithms and so forth, we can really innovate in that space and create more jobs, because the more we allow this, the more productions we will get going, the more jobs we will create. So this is a massive block to the industry being able to grow. Companies waiting too many months just to hear about whether their DTI rebate has been approved. And then ED, what another incredible space. I just recently saw what Nando's is doing with their ED funding and the impact they're having with those artists. It is just phenomenal. They've created a portal for these furniture and lighting designs that the Nando's all around the world has to have South African designed Nando stores with the chairs and the artwork and everything and they've created a portal where they have to order from there. I mean, that's true empowerment. That's really helping. They've taken them to Milan and really are doing incredible work with their ED, and I think if more corporates thought about that. Okay, I gotta move faster. So yeah, Disney is mining stories in Africa. It is the new mining. Cultural industries are the new gold. And if we do not define our visual aesthetic, it will continue to be defined for us. When Princess and the Frog first came out, the character was so hideous that the black community in America were up in arms. They were forced to eventually change it. But it just tells you what the programming is of how the controllers of that define African look. I mean, in America, they come from blackface. So yeah, Africanization of imagery and animation is a big concept that I'm pushing in the internship that I launched this year through Chumologong. That's one of the issues that we're dealing with. So yeah, to give you an idea of the top grossing animated films, these are some of the top ones. And then this, of the 21st century, it's all animation. The top grossing films are all animated. So animation is the future. And in closing, I would like to say, please, can you all, if you're in the animation, gaming, VR industry, please become members of Animation SA, and please volunteer. Volunteerism is a key part of how we shift our industries and take them forward. This takes a lot of work from people who are dedicating their time to making sure that we shift our industries to the next level. Thank you.
Wow, okay, that was really provocative and really a great deal of fruitful insights to really pick from and really reflect on and really start to make sense of what is the way forward. And more specifically, just to capture some of the ideas that you put on the table around design thinking as a process. I found that quite exciting and something that's relatively new in my understanding of how production has been kind of approached, especially from animations, the animation space, and how then that affords us a way of thinking about the value chain in more strategic ways, in ways in which we understand each element of the value chain as equally important as the making of the animation, the artistic elements, as well as the distribution elements. This is something that for a long time a lot of us have not really considered when we enter these spaces, and a really refreshing way to really start thinking about what the potential is really. And even further, just to start adding in notions of transmedia and thinking about what that means. And these are like really interesting terms that I don't really hear in a lot of spaces being engaged. Well, more specifically, I hear that in the advertising space, but to kind of hear it from an animation space and us thinking about it as a tool that is at our disposal is a really refreshing approach. So I'll leave the questions and the engagement to the end, because I've got a lot to ask and a lot to kind of really address with you, but yeah, that will come at a later stage. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Ajoa Ankoma. I pronounced it correctly, right? Okay, thank you. Ajoa is a legal policy consultant, is a legal and policy consultant and passionate about Africa. Okay, I think this was a typo, and the creative and cultural industries. Ajoa obtained her BSc and LLB from Rhodes University and has worked as an in-house legal counsel at 2 large listed entities in logistics, mobility, and mining equipment industries. So that's quite an interesting spectrum of experiences. She recently left the National Film and Video Foundation after working in the role of legal, policy, and compliance officer for 4 years, and founded Creative Represented. That's the name of the consultancy, and provided legal and policy advisory services to creative organizations based on the African continent. Ajoa is also deputy chairperson of the Altarial Network South Africa, which advocates policy development for the local creative industry across sectors and as well as champions a Pan-African connecting of creative organizations. Ajoa has studied her LLM in media, entertainment and technology, law and policy at UCLA next year. Oh, she will be. She will be studying her LLM at UCLA in USA next year. So over to Ajoa. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Ajwa. So I wrote out what I need to say because it just helps me. And so I'm gonna sit down because I don't really have a podium. It's gonna be really hard for me to stand up. I guess I am an aspiring legal technologist. I love that word. I think most young lawyers are right in that kind of thinking. There isn't really a clash in that. I think we, from our own side, are trying to disrupt the legal profession. It doesn't work for anyone, really. I was asked to speak on intellectual property and copyright, which is an interesting question because copyright is part of intellectual property. So to speak about them as if it's 2 different things is incorrect. And I think, yeah, just for knowledge's sake. I'm going to center a lot of my talk around the environment, so the policy environment. I think not enough people are thinking about it at that level. Not enough people are engaging at that level. And it's a pity because when you don't lobby for what you need, then policy makers make decisions in a vacuum. They make decisions without the knowledge. And in part, you can blame them because they should be seeking it, but also they have nothing to base it on. You know, so yeah, that's going to be what I'm going to be talking about. So intellectual property is a general term. It refers to a variety of intangible rights. And when we say intangible, we mean rights that you can't touch, feel, hold. So in the same way that you can have a stake in assets from the physical property, like land, you can have a stake in your intellectual property. They're a bundle of rights under this term intellectual property. You have terms like copyright and trademark and patents and geographical indicators. And it all depends on what your mind has created. What is your mind, what work, what thing has your mind created? And then from that you will either have trademarks or you will have patents, geographical indicators, or copyright. Most creative and content producers focus on copyright because I guess that's largely where their rights lie, and I think you'll see from the rest of my talk, there's so much more to it. As a content creator, like if you're speaking about merchandising, you definitely should be thinking about trademarks as well. If you're thinking about developing identity, because I think that's a large part of our copyright system that I think we leave out, particularly as Africans, we keep just looking at it from this economical point of view, but the real loss is this loss of identity. We distinguish between a creator and the owner, but what does that do for our communities? So you need to be also thinking of the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Bill, which right now is really rooted in science and technology, but has the same effect on a lot of creative content. Yeah, and there are a lot of legislative changes taking place. Last year, and actually from 1996, we've been having these discussions around the White Paper of Arts and Culture. Hopefully you would have heard about it, but if you haven't, you really should look it up, because it is the policy statement that's going to direct how government deals with arts and culture for the next 30 years. And most people who are interested in policy will tell you it's a very difficult document. You know, it shouldn't be. But if we don't have creators saying we want a 10-page document, why is it 90-something pages? Why would government take that imperative? They don't, like, for them, they're just trying to say we've written something down and then we have something. We need to be the ones, or creators need to be the ones to say we want it in plain language, we want it in 10 pages, we want it in infographics, whatever it is. So, yeah, I think you'll see from my talk by the end that creatives need to get involved. They can't say that they don't understand it. Even if that's your critique, then put it on record. If you get a document like the Copyright Amendment Bill and you need a lawyer to help you interpret it, then why aren't you writing a submission saying, I don't understand this? Because that in itself is a critique, and it would be much better if we had it in plain language. And then I was asked to answer the question, what are the main contentious points in the current Copyright Amendment Act, or bill? And I mean, there's a lot. The copyright bill is contentious. It's the whole thing. It underpins one of the most combative attempts at legal reform we've seen in our democratic history. It's already been approved by Parliament, and so it sits awaiting the signature of the President, and is the culmination of a 2-year process revealing how small the pie is, or perhaps how few people have had a seat at the table. And now we see how many people have been waiting since 1978 for a seat at the table in this era of politics of the stomach. A casualty in this fight has been the Performers Protection Amendment Bill, which in itself is not as contentious as the Copyright Amendment Bill, but which contains clauses which are unfortunately linked to the Copyright Amendment Bill. And when the rewards are small, the fight gets petty. That's not my quote, someone said it. Never have we been alive to how diverse the interests are in this copyright regime. The lobbying has been intense. I think it's the first we've ever seen it. It has resulted in multiple advocacy and rights groups mushrooming. I'm sure you've heard of the Copyright Alliance and many others. We've seen aggressive social media campaigns, we've seen radio interviews, we've seen panel discussions like this, and the kind of political lobbying that we really only see in American television shows. So dare I say that the only legislative reform as contentious as this one is probably our land debate, which isn't surprising. We are, of course, discussing property rights, intellectual property rights, with profit margins from which the creators of content have largely been excluded. Or more accurately, we are reforming intellectual property rights in a regime in which the imbalance of power has reduced the freedom to contract and now requires the regulator to step in and ensure transformation is achieved. I know you use a different word to transformation, but whatever the word is, if you are going to talk to your regulator, remember that that should be the focus. I think that a lot of people have lost sight to that in this amendment. Several clauses and concepts have, several clauses and concepts have become the seat of this contention, such as the now infamous fair use versus fair dealings clause, the royalties debate, default commissioning ownership. Bearing in mind the starting point, transformation, and to overhaul legislation that was done in 1978 that is now clearly unfit for this fourth industrial revolution in a developmental state, how have we gotten here? How are we doomed from the start? Clearly, we've had a political influence in this thing. The amendment of the copyright regime has not been organic. It wasn't because the DTI looked and said, we're monitoring how much people are making or not making from this process, and then therefore we are going to use that evidence-based approach to amend this. It didn't happen like that. It happened because a certain sector felt like it was uncomfortable in the returns that it was now seeing in this digital age, and they initiated this conversation. And at the beginning, that's where the conversation was. And then when they overhauled it, because the legislation had never been overhauled since 1978, suddenly government had all sectors to deal with. But that's not how they went into it in mind. And I think anyone who engages with this bill sees all these conflicting parts that are trying to please a lot of different people, but with no real direction. I think that we would have a lot less of the contention if we would see government just say, you know, we want to achieve transformation. And so if this is the status quo and you're uncomfortable, then that's it. Then you have a rational basis, and you also allow the people who have been benefiting from the status quo to tailor their submissions in a different way. If they know that government is unyielding on this transformation point, then how do producers now make their margins? How do investors now make their margins? But government didn't do that. They tried to please every single entity. So now we find ourselves with widely diverse, equally significant and competing interests, and an interest that requires strategy that isn't there. So we have ourselves with this bill before the president and everyone waiting with bated breath, because if he does sign this bill, and I mean it's already passed through Parliament, they really did a hospital pass to the president, because Parliament should have actually solved a lot of the contention at that forum. I don't know that there's much that can be done. But we wait, and if he signs it, there's a lot of industries that will collapse. We know for sure that the publishing industry is almost gone. There's a legal system that isn't prepared for the kind of contention that it's going to yield. And then we ask ourselves what went wrong. So, as I've said before, in my opinion, it has been a failure of your parliamentary process. With every change of law, you need a consultation process. You can't pay lip service to consultation. Consultation, it serves two interests. Number one, it makes sure that what goes into what you're doing is for the people, from the people. But number two, it gets buy-in. I don't really think that the South African public is just, completely irrational. But they see changes that they don't know how the legislature got into. So if we had a consultation process that wasn't rushed to try and meet an election date, maybe we wouldn't take just 2 years to overhaul legislation that has been there since 1978 that clearly needed a lot more thinking process to it. We see a legislature that failed to balance the push from the producers to maintain the status quo against the push from actors to gain royalty rights, to balance the push from collection agencies to maintain the status quo from the push from musicians to change the who and how is collecting and distributing those royalties, to balance a push from publishers to maintain the status quo against a push from academic institutions and other users to have easier and free access to content. And the impending disruptor, which is the digital age in which we all already live, is this undercurrent making it even more difficult for the regulator to find its feet. Without the direction of an overarching arts and culture policy, the transformation imperative of the copyright reform process has been lost in the details. We have seen Parliament cobble together a bill so flawed it will result in many disputes from the moment it is signed. It was clear from the consultation process in 2017, and I don't know how many of you were there in Cape Town, that the bill was never aired out, and the resulting product will leave many people, if not all, unsatisfied in some way. So what is the solution? Can they go back to the drawing board? Can they unring the bell? Well, like we said, it's before the president is ready to be signed. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing for content creators to do, because any act needs regulations. And that's, again, a second opportunity to make sure that this legislation, as it is, works for you. Yeah. I think lastly, and I will come to it later in my talk, is just if you are also going to participate in this process further when we're now discussing the regulations or any other directives that come from this bill when it is signed, you need to force government to try and bring all the parties to the table. So the Copyright Amendment Bill sits under the DTI, and right now we're seeing it from a DTI perspective with only the economy in mind. But where is the Department of Arts and Culture, Sports and Recreation? What are they saying about copyright and where it links to heritage and where it links to identity? I know that people care about that, but if you don't force the two people to meet and you're just relying on maybe a Department of Cooperative Government to sort it out, well, this is where we are. If you have an Indigenous Knowledge Systems Bill that sits under the Department of Science and Technology, how do we as the public make sure that the Department of Science and Technology is speaking to the DTI? I think we blame a lot on government. We see a failure in this process, but then also we let the train keep on going. So, yeah. Then I was asked to answer a question about what are the positive aspects of the bill. And I think it depends on who you are. So the bill has really tried to satisfy a lot of different sectors. It's given a little bit to everybody. So if you are perhaps a visual artist, you're very happy about the artist resale right. That means that when you create work, you will gain royalties every single time that it is sold. But if you're an investor and you enjoy the status quo, then you're not happy. If you are a filmmaker or a television series producer, you're probably very happy about the changing of Section 21, which changes the commissioning structure. Previously, we had a blanket, he who commissions owns, in perpetuity, worldwide, forever. And right now, we have a clause in the bill that says that you will only own it to the extent that you needed it when you were commissioning it. So if you commissioned it for night programming on the SABC, that's the extent to which you own it. If it gets later sold somewhere else, you don't own it, you have to renegotiate. That helps people who are content producers, but obviously people who are investors and commissioning people would be very unhappy from that. So what could have been done better? There was a huge missed opportunity for alignment, for different stakeholders to come together, for different government departments to come together, and really for content creators to step up and have their say. I think a lot of people just leave it to whatever organizations they belong to and whatever guilds they belong to, and they don't interrogate it, they don't bother reading it. I think most people have never read the Copyright Amendment Bill. Or let me say never tried, because it is a really difficult piece of legislation to get through, even as a lawyer. I think what's also missing from it is identity. So, copyright allows you to say who owns, who can copy, and how they can use it. And often the creator and the owner are not the same people. But when we know that so much of our knowledge, we can't point to who created it, but we know who should own it, then how should our regime be changed? And then lastly, there's a complete lack of plain language. The Copyright Amendment Bill should not be as long as it is. We need practical implementation. They're creating a copyright tribunal, and hopefully that will mean easier access for people. But again, that will only be as much as people engage with it and maybe lobby for how it should be used. The bill also does not take sight of the fourth industrial revolution at all. It is not future-proof at all. Yeah, that's me.
Ajoa, our aspiring legal technologist, that's the way you phrased it, right? Something like of that nature. Well, wow, what a really interesting and provocative way of also thinking about this. Thinking about policy as environment, that's something that I don't think gets really spoken about, and looking at how different state institutions really impact our ability to really materialize the economic value around our own identities and the expressions that we all enjoy in our day-to-day work that we produce. So I really, really think also the campaign that you already are starting to build around, we should actually campaign for a bill that's written in simple language so that we can take it apart in ways that really speak to us, and we can respond to it in ways that then it's their duty to then bring us along on this journey, not the other way around. Because I think a lot of this conversation gets lost in an expectation of us to have this legal framework and at our disposal, or all of us understand what everything means contractually and patently and intellectually in terms of intellectual property. And hang on, when do we get a chance to actually just focus on what we are specialists at as producers, as creatives? It's a little too much to have that expectation on the everyday creative professional and practitioner on the ground. So I think you make a really good case and campaign. We look forward to hearing you kind of organizing some sort of or mobilizing us towards that in the near future, if you're up for it. But it's really a worthwhile thing to really take further and for us to really think about and really be active in this conversation and demand these things to be simplified for us and so that we can apply them. Yeah. Anyway, moving on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Michael Dion. Michael is the co-founder and director and creative director of Augmenters, an augmented reality multiplayer mobile game built on the blockchain that puts you in control of fantastic creatures that you truly own. In 2015, Michael co-founded Augmenters, and in 2016, he appeared on the Shark Tank essay where he was funded by Vinnie Lingham and Gil Ovid via the first Shark Tank deal to be done in Bitcoin. Thanks to Michael's vision and passion, along with the assistance of experts, Augmenters raised $1 million during a 30-day token sale, which ended in February 2017. You can clap your hands for that. That is, that is amazing. At the time, it was the most successful token sale ever conducted by a mobile game project, and it was also the first token sale conducted in South Africa. With the background in graphic design, videography, animation, and editing and VFX, Michael is leading the charge in augmented reality mobile gaming sphere. He has recently been featured in Fast Company's Top 20 Under 30 feature, and as well as African Independent Top 40 Under 40. Augmenters has also been featured in Brainstorm magazine as one of the most innovative tech startups. Michael Dion has been a keynote speaker at both Startup Grind SA and Heavy Chef. Thank you. Over to you, Michael.
Hello. It works. All right. Two things before I start. One, to condense blockchain and everything in 10 minutes is insane. So what I want to do is read straight from that, because if I go on a tangent, we end up talking about the fake moon landing and Illuminati and stuff, because I get off topic very quickly. Secondly, I talk very fast when I get very excited. So if I talk very fast, you understand what I'm saying, then just please raise your hand and I will calm the hell down. I'm not in this frame. All right, cool. So what I'm discussing is blockchain solutions for the broader cultural and creative industries. So who here knows what blockchain is? Cool, it's a few. So to condense that in one sentence, in essence, the blockchain is a shared, programmable, cryptographically secure, and therefore trusted ledger which no single user controls and is inspected by everyone. So hopefully the rest of this that I'm going through will kind of give more context towards what that actually means. So features that could be leveraged for use in the creative and cultural economy. So first of all, transactions are verified and approved by consensus among participants in the network, which would be the miners, making fraud way more difficult. The full chronological events, for example, transactions, which is Bitcoin's main focus, that takes place are tracked, allowing anyone to trace and order prior transactions from the beginning of the ledger. The technology operates on a distributed rather than centralized ledger, which is the current state of affairs. The platform, with each participant having access to the exact same ledger of records, allowing participants to enter and leave at will, and providing resilience against attacks. Yeah. So an artist-centric model for blockchain. In the creative economy, blockchain can redefine how artists are remunerated by acting as a platform for creators of intellectual property to receive value for their work. A common complaint lodged by artists is that performance rights is on for music artists. Organizations that are intermediaries, such as Spotify and YouTube, increasingly inherit themselves in between the value chain between the artist and the audience, and how the artists receive smaller cuts of that revenue. How they have less say in what's how the stuff has been priced, shared, and advertised. For example, for Spotify, if you upload your tracks, it takes between 120 to 170 streams before you get a first little penny of revenue, which is really sad. Oh, sorry, back one. Now it's cocked up. That's good. All right. I have no idea why that happened, but it's good. It's very good. What was that slide? Okay, so we'll skip that because yes. So several features. I'm going to go through 5 different features of what blockchain can help address these issues. One, enabling smart contracts. This is what Ethereum, one of the cryptocurrencies' main focus is, which will enable artists' rights to allocate revenue shares contributed to creative processes. So in music, a smart contract will potentially replace conventional contracts, which is more esoteric and leaves artists with little power over the terms of what they actually generate and produce. Royalties can be designed to be inclusive, offering more fairer terms for creatives, such as composers, lyricists, and musicians. So all stakeholders in that process will have defined shares, so no one can actually kind of screw you over, which we all very know well that happens. An example of this would be peer tracks. It's a service that allows artists to seek immediate royalties for anything that gets played. They have full ownership of their content. The service works by attaching smart contracts to every single song the artist uploads and dividing the revenue accordingly to what they stipulate in those contracts. So you, as the artist, can stipulate how much everyone gets. So it's a fair game. Next is establishing transparent peer-to-peer transactions, which is the whole focus of cryptocurrency and blockchains. All transactions for creative work can be seen by validated, including all access to the work, how much revenue the work is generating at any point in time. This will allow stakeholders to have a better sense overall value of the creative work that's being produced, all in the form of a digital ledger provided in the blockchain. Furthermore, blockchain will enable transparency, whoever owns the creative material to it. So whoever actually produced the work first, example like with the Lion King and other things that you brought up, those will be ingrained in the blockchain forever. So there's no way in hell that Disney can come along or can say, hey, we made this first. No, you fucking didn't. It's on the blockchain. It's irreversible, and it's impossible for them to come along and say, this belongs to us. A service that would be an example is a scribe. The service works by providing each creative work a unique cryptographic ID. It's verified on the blockchain, which means ownership can be traced and then secured, shared. So I mean, it'll always be on there that you own this RP. Promoting efficient dynamic pricing, which is very cool. Creative content can be mispriced because of so tracking demand for creative content, pricing can be more dynamic. Price for creative content can fluctuate according to supply and demand. Moreover, artists that control pieces that have ability to set prices themselves without going through complex web intermediaries. As blockchain can provide records of who's been granted access to the rights of the creative works, this can then be harnessed to price creativity works dynamically. And more importantly, because artists have closer to their creative work than ever before, they'll be able to have a stronger voice in pricing schemes. Furthermore, can provide discounts at certain times when they feel like it. Okay, micrometering and micromonetizing. So iTunes, for example, when consumers buy a complete song, what the blockchain will enable is that snippets of the creative work can be made available for a price. For example, a few seconds of a song that you want to use for a movie trailer, an advert, and so forth. This kind of micrometering works by having blockchain records price components of that actual art. We're defining the smallest consumable units of the creative content. So you don't have to go and waste your money on a complete track. You can just buy a piece of it you want. Again, it's doing that magical stuff where it's overlaid. That is about a company that does that exact thing. I'll tell you afterwards if you want to know about it. And also, lastly, we'll be enabling a reputation system. So it helps link reputations to specific addresses that you would own. Thus allowing both producers and consumers of the creative content to verify one another. This could encourage stronger collaboration, better behavior by promoting cooperative terms for content creators and consumers alike. Participants who repeatedly don't fulfill terms in a contract or try to game the system will have their actions recorded and then determined against bad behavior. So if you're a dick, this will tell you that you're a dick. Okay, so I'm going to go through one use case. So this is a company called Mentors. Totally, just check it out if you want. So Mentors is an augmented reality blockchain game. It allows you to summon characters into the real world through your mobile device. Think of Pokemon Go on steroids. And each character is on the blockchain itself. It's stored and everything is on the ledger. I'll explain more detail about that now. So what each of these tokens are, there's fungible and non-fungible tokens. So we use the ERC 1155 fungible tokens framework. So fungible tokens are tokens that are not unique. So example, currency in a game, everything will be in gold. All the gold is one-to-one. So one gold equals one gold. There's no unique aspects to it at all. This enables people to be able to trade and sell this called for real currency or cryptocurrencies straight up, and you can buy it vice versa. And this is what you use to buy in-game assets. The next would be the non-fungible tokens, which is where the real cool stuff comes along. My image is missing. That's good. I love it. A non-fungible token is where everything is recorded. So, example, if there is, I'm going to go for Pokemon. It says Pikachu. There's a level 1 Pikachu and level 1 Pikachu. Exactly the same thing. But each one has their own unique stats, level, ability, who owned it prior, what ability it has. All that is recorded. So each one is 100% unique. So even though it's the exact same level, the win-loss ratio, all that is defined in how it is. For example, you could have Mark Zuckerberg. He's just totally going to play this game. He's going to be able to sell that token to someone else, and you'll have a record of saying, I have Mark Zuckerberg's freaking Pikachu. So that's what non-fungible tokens are. So truly own your assets. This is where if you, for example, if you play Call of Duty and you buy a skin for your gun, you got a badass pink camo skin for your gun. If that game eventually the server runs down, shuts down, the game's a flop, you lose your money. That's it. It's gone. With tokens, it enables you to keep it's in your wallet. So whatever tokens you buy, whatever characters you buy, skins, spells, you name it, that will be inside your address, which will be transferable and fully owned by you. So even if, example, Mentors had to completely fail, those tokens can be used, which I'll go on next, is cross-game assets. This is where the really, really freaking cool shit happens. And it's happening right now. So a company called, oh crap, what are they called? Oh, when I think of it, I'll tell you. It's a game company that's allowing people to be able to make these assets very easily. So we're kind of doing it ourselves, but there is a platform that guys can make assets and interchange assets within a game. So cross-game assets will enable you to have the shield spells, characters, spells, whatever that other games are willing to enable in their game. So example, you could be playing Grand Theft Auto, and then all of a sudden you have a game asset from Pokemon. So you have Pikachu running around in Grand Theft Auto. If they enable that asset to be in their game, those assets are interchangeable. So if Mentors had a fail, another game called Dust will be able to inherit those assets and be interchangeable. A use case of this would be if you watch anime. Sword Art Online is if you have your game stats, your complete character stats on one person, that exact token would be playable in the next game. Different textile, how it looks, 3D game, 2D game, doesn't matter. Those stats can carry through if you wish. Okay, this is supposed to be a cool as cinematic we made. It's totally working. As for questions and answers, but that is it. I hope I did that in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Wow. I don't know how many of you are converted, like blockchain is the future. Like, really, where have we been? Like, if we are looking for a technology that's going to absolutely democratize our power and our access to our own production and our own value chains, this is the way to go about it. The ways in which we can actually control this very process and production distribution is mind-blowing. I mean, I can imagine that there are many entities out there that are first trying to frame this in their interest before they kind of encourage our states to really start forming legislature that really speaks to it in more concrete ways and in ways that really situate the question around transformation at the heart of it. So, I mean, the questions that are going to come out of this are really are mind-blowing. But once again, thank you. That just frames this whole journey in a completely different light. So now I want to bring this to our final speaker, Usisanda Hina. If you could just give me a second. Okay, so just to read off Sisanda's biography, but before I read Sisanda's biography, I just want to kind of bring our attention to the format at which this kind of conversation has unfolded, and also the perspective that he's going to bring to this forum as a creative practitioner of a particular kind in performance arts, and how this is now going to require us to shift our way of understanding the intellectual property, where it sits, where this conversation sits, and what it means to us as performers, as the performance being embodied and being essentially the product yourself, and how this then translates into a realm of this new digital revolution that's unfolding before us, and how policies are really kind of factoring into this conversation, that very shift. What happens in a scenario where a performer was part of a film that did so well, and then a few years later, an animation is being fashioned in his image, and what does that mean in relation to his ownership of that creative property, that intellectual property? So these are the ways in which we really need to have this conversation in very complex ways, and in ways in which we don't do away with an understanding and a validation of our traditional art forms, but an understanding of what they look like in the future and how we transition into that future. So just to go into it, Sisanda is an award-winning actor-producer and has had a vast experience in the film, and value chain from writing, directing to packaging and financing motion pictures. He has starred or supported in over 35 local and international productions, from dramas to films, comedies, sitcoms, and even lent his voice to animations. Henna has also hosted and presented TV shows such as Vukuzenzele, or All You Need Is Love, and Gospel Gold. He currently appears on SABC1's Sunday night prime time drama Mjindini, and stars in Canal Plus drama series Agent. He's a winner of the 2005 Eastern Cape Young Achiever Award and the 2003 South African Selamathunzi Dugu Award for Best Actor in Drama for the hit primetime SABC1 drama series Cha-Cha. Henna also went on to produce and direct award-winning shows like Intersections 2, Gold Diggers, and Greed and Desire. Henna is a qualified NLP success coach, an MC facilitator, keynote speaker with Murray Gray and Associates. He has served on the South African Guild of Actors Executive Committee, is member of the Independent Producers Organization and Independent Black Filmmakers Collective. How's that for a handful? So, over to you.
Yeah. I don't know if I should have been a politician or a professional athlete. Thank you so much. So to jump in, I'm going to tell more stories about how this has, in other words, policy law has either worked or hasn't worked. A friend of mine texts me, no. I'm at the Starbucks. My barrister says, hey, I saw you last night. I said, on what? She says, on Encore on DSTV. When you were still young. Oh man, you did so well in that series, right? And guess how much I got for that? Guess how much Cloudy sold the entire SABC library to DSTV Encore forever. And then he left. Context is, if Cha-Cha was repeated on SABC, right? So it came after like Yizo Yizo, Gazlam, massive hit, you know? Like the masses watched those shows like mad, right? We still had a repeat clause within those contracts. But now that it's sold to another broadcaster, you get nothing. And DSTV will keep playing those things forever. Okay, so as a director, I worked on Greed and Desire, which played on DSTV. It was commissioned by Mzansi Magic, and they can repeat that as much as they want. But what's interesting is, we as a director, part of creating that, you'll see nothing. You'll know how writers on all of these shows will see zilch. Interestingly, Ava DuVernay she tweets and says, oh, Netflix told me that When They See Us was watched by 21 million subscribers from Netflix, right? A, she gets those stats. B, she's in touch with those people. But what I'm pointing to you is, what I'm interested in is like, that's so interesting. Blockchain could maybe be the future for us. Okay, so I started out as an actor, then I shifted to write, produce, direct, and then I joined the IPO. A few times I sat on some NFVF panels, discussing quite a bit around these topics. So when I jumped to one of the stories that was quite controversial, Generations, massive hit of a TV soap opera, right? Cool, so Generations been making money for SABC for years and, sometimes keeping SABC afloat as sort of the most watched television show by the masses. Cool, so I'm working with Mandla Kaduka, he's one of the actors of the Generation 16. And I was directing him on a new show on a sitcom called Gauteng Maboneng. So when we meet, it's maybe a couple of months after the Generation 16 saga, okay? And what's interesting is I'll fast forward later in IPO when we had an emergency meeting because SABC didn't pay small companies again. And we were all like, it's crisis, what are we gonna do? Should we all hold back our tapes? This quick little story is that Mfundi Vundla was in the room, and Rehad Desai was sitting next to me. Rehad produced Minor Shot Down. He's the director of these controversial documentaries, and he's the head, I think, of SASFED at the moment, and at IPO. So I put up my hand as a young producer, okay? There's people here who used to produce shows I used to watch when I was like 12 and in my nappies. So we were all in the same room. My crew has been freaking sending me threats because I haven't been able to pay them on my first contract with SABC as an entrepreneur, as a producer. And we're like facing complete bankruptcy. So I say, only if the big three soaps will hold back their tapes, then it's a proper blackout, then it's a proper strike. Mfundi's at the back, he says, yeah, where were you? He says, where were you when we had to be taken off screen? Eh? Did you guys? So what's happening here? We're trying to work together as a collective to stand and force the system to work with us, right? And he, as an individual, he said like he had suffered at the time. Okay, let me backtrack to the story of the Generation 16. Highest rated show. These guys here, hey, your show has been sold. People are talking about you in the Bronx in the United States on Africa Channel. It's been resold in the UK. The show's been resold all over Africa. The cast get together and say, okay, guys, if we stand together, we can force them to pay us some royalties, because obviously it's been sold for a lot of money. For sure you got to sell. Long story short, they strike. They refuse to go to work. He's obviously got a couple of weeks. SABC call in, there's meetings, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, broadcast and the producer bundle up. They say, okay, fine. Have it your way, SABC. And Generations ended, right? And for 2 months, Skim Sam took over the 8 o'clock slot. He comes back with a new show, Generations, The Legacy, and gets a whole bunch of new actors. Connie come here, and we went mad as the industry. We're like, any actor who's going to take this job at the cost of these guys who are fighting just for royalties. But Rapulana's like, hey, boss, are you going to give me 100,000 rand? Connie's left that side. Are you going to give me 100,000 rand a month? This is when Vuya Dabula got launched and, becomes a superstar. Okay, so maybe a year later now, I'm on the guild and the DTI starts its consultations. And okay, I'm going to, 2 more stories about how this thing hasn't worked. Recently, I'm on a show called Trackers. Mnet has been buying content from HBO for years. So then they're like, okay, we got to start cross-selling this stuff, right? They make a deal, HBO Cinemax and Mnet co-produce a Dion Meyer series. Thankfully, Dion Meyer is one of the producers, and that's how he keeps part of his pie in this, right? So his book has done well. It's translated into tons of languages around the world. Everybody knows him as a great thriller writer from South Africa. They decide, okay, cool, let's make this into a series. He's like, hey, I'm going to be there, adapting it to a screenplay. Cool, so on day one, we all walk in there, British producers, German partners, and the South African guys. Cool, and Dion Skypes in. He's on a farm still, sort of, right? I don't know. But anyway, he's there. Long story short, they say, so I asked a question. I said, so where is this going to be syndicated? And producer says, look, we've got the German distributor, South Africa, but HBO Cinemax will distribute it around the world. Cool. At that point, my agent is still making we're still negotiating. To summarize, we say to them, okay, cool. I want to charge you as an international actor, not as a local hire. 2 different things. So here, when they come, and they facilitate, like they'll shoot a lot of black sales, a lot of those things, you'll get on the same show, we have the same amount of screen time, you're going to get paid in dollars times 15 of what I get paid. And then you get paid a SAG rate, which is Screen Actors Guild, the American one. And there is no bar for the South African producer to pay me on the same level as you. You name them, whether it's Tony Goroge in whatever it is, Long Walk to Freedom. There's all of been these things. So the guild has been fighting to keep a standard on these things. And then we said, DTI, you're the only one who can enforce this because you give a rebate to those companies coming here and they get money from you. So we definitely need the legislation to change. Anyway, long story short, these producers, interestingly, Tim and Kobus had done a local small budget rom-com, Klenkarua. I was in that film. They offered all the actors 2%, 3%, 1% profit share in perpetuity. Okay? Because they themselves were actor turned producers. On this show, working with Dion Mayer and HBO, etc., Mnet said, listen, this has got to be a buyout. That's it. There will be no residuals on anyone's contract. We go back at some point, Tony was going to play the lead on a show called, on Mnet, The Wild. He starts filming 2 weeks in, hasn't signed his contract. He says, if I don't get my residuals, I'm walking. He walks. We all get a call, Sisanda, will you come and replace Tony on Monday? We're going to reshoot the 2 weeks. Mnet would rather reshoot the entire thing than give him his royalties. I'm not going to change that. Anyway, long story short, he did his one-man picketing there. It didn't work. It died down. I didn't end up doing the show. Another guy did. They shot The Wild, and now The Wild is on Showmax. And they'll repeat it as much as they want, and guess what? Okay, the cast of Friends annually, 5 minutes, are sharing $20 million per annum on royalties. $20 million on royalties per annum. So it was long overdue for us to get our royalties. So then, so we sit around the table with Saga many times, and when this lobbying started happening for the bill, because the consultation, DTI went out to a few bodies and said, cool, can you come and help us to amend this performance protection bill? Okay, one last example, MTN, my first big commercial deal, MTN says, those who don't know, there was a commercial, 2003, 2004, guy sits in the back of the taxi. This other girl gets in. The two taxis take off down Commissioner Street down the road. Your love gets sweeter So the guy looks, he sees a number at the back of the taxi. How's my driving? Call this number. He takes the number down, he phones. The two taxis stop at a robot. She's sitting there. He phones and says, hi, please, can you pass the phone to the girl right at the back? The phone gets passed down all the way to the back. She holds it just before the robot's open. He says, hi, look to your left. She looks to the left, and then it says MTN, wherever you go. Great. So they bought me out by paying me 100,000 Rand per annum not to do any other brand, right? Great. I'm a no-name. I'm still young. I was like, that's fantastic. That's what I would have earned as a first-time job as a professional programmer, right? So, okay, cool. And I still get paid for every commercial that I do. But 3 years down the line, they don't renew the contract. And the contract is over. Somebody comes in to OR Tambo and say, hi, Sisanda, look, here's a picture of you, massive billboard, still there, right? Did I have any recourse to get paid? No, 0. So who would monitor then that the image is still being reused by the brand long after the contract, or even on new platforms, or that they played it? How do we monitor that? And then how does the artist then begin to make money? Okay, let me shift to the problem as it comes as a producer. Now I put on my producer hat, like, okay, let's start creating content. You're going to own your own content. You're going to make money. You're not just going to die as a pauper, right? So who knows Rain Tlokwana? Rain Tlokwana is like the Jim Carrey of South Africa, right? So he played Velapi on SABC1 for years. He's like Joe Mafela. Like all of these these sitcoms that played in the mid-80s into the early 90s, Leon Schuster probably became also one of those people. But so he was on so much television. Like he made us laugh for years. But I was so saddened when he passed away with nothing. And there'll be SABC News bulletin about how can this guy have been an icon for 25 years and look at him now. His shows have been repeated over and over and over and over again, but he's earned 0 royalties for that. So as the bill was coming out, as part of the guild, we're not all legal professionals, but we're like, listen, we got to be activists. These things need to change. For example, I took the tracker's job because I was like, look, I want to do an international show. At some point, legislation will change and I will earn royalties. But for this one, let me sacrifice it. I'm paying school fees. But I remember Shomla was in tears the one day because one of the legends had said to him, Ken Kampu said to him, Mfanam, when you leave, just make sure that you don't leave this industry the same as what it was for us. So it's like, okay, we got to make sure we enforce that legislation needs to change. Cool. Actor story. Now producer story. Producer, you go and create, come up with all amazing concepts, get to SABC, get shortlisted. Here you go. SABC says, fine. We'll give you 12.5 million rand, produce X amount number of episodes, but guess what? It's ours. The name, everything. The writer gets paid for that episode, but will never see another cent. The director, the producer. So that's where, again, this intellectual property, the challenge was to them. So we said, okay, the DTI rebate, which basically puts money back into the producer's pocket, whoever produces feature films, blah, 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 in this country creating jobs, DTI said, we'll give you a rebate. So then we said, DTI, you need to start forcing the SABC to not own our content. They can license it, but we need to be the ones that can continue to earn royalties from the work that's been created. And that's why my eyes are going big. Like when you were using these examples, I'm like, what? Even like the different people involved, whether it's the writers, the producers, the directors involved in making the show, and not just the faces, the actors, right, need to keep earning royalties. Okay, Mnet was, funded one of my first major feature film project as a producer, but their contract is problematic. So their current battle with Netflix, I welcome it. Although I say, hey, how's it, Jan? We're here at the Silver Scarum Fears for Cake Net, and we're, celebrating 30 Afrikaans films that have been made. Yes, cheers. I'm on the part of the jury. I'll vote. Cheers. But I'm like, yeah, Netflix, come, yo. These guys, they're messing, because we need that competition in order to, loosen the legislation. Anyway, long story short, they are pressed in a corner because they need to start changing their policy around commissioning and even the so-called pre-sale. Because that pre-sale deal at the moment, I was with DTI, they were saying, actually, some of the clauses would say, okay, the producer owns the rights to the film. After 12 years, it's going to slip into the Mnet library. And basically, then all the rights will basically go to Mnet in perpetuity. It used to say for Africa only, and then they changed that once they decided that, Showmax needs to be, to compete with Mnet on that large scale. So then just before we went to the National Council of Provinces, this is the Performance Protection Amendment Bill inside the Copyright Amendment Bill, some of the producers were red flagging the free use clause, which you spoke about. As like you were saying, it was a little bit half-cooked, just to put it in simple terms. So we understood that, okay, cool, you guys need to earn royalties, but like you're saying, it's a long document that's basically half-cooked, that's got some holes in it, because some of our work will basically go into the digital space and then anybody can reuse in whatever way they like. Two last points I want to touch on is exploiting culture or identity. So people are like, yeah, let's celebrate Black Panther. Black Panther, broke box office records, blah, blah, great, lovely. So, if I look at that print on the wall there, right, and I say, if I say is Shweshwe as a print that we might identify with South Africa or Southern Africa or as an African kind of design or idea, who does that idea belong to? Do you know what I mean? And can it be protected with the group of people? So I saw a Nipsey Hussle documentary recently, and there's a clip there where he says, I can't remember which brand wanted him to, there was a big commercial idea, and they said, yeah, we need you to pull that gang sign, right? For the commercial. And so now they're offering him this big paycheck. So then he says, wait. I represent a huge community where I come from. I can't commercialize or exploit that identity just for my own stomach. That thing belongs to a whole group of people, right? So, and before this, I was saying to her, how do we then protect those things? Let's say now in this new Lion King that comes out, whatever. Here's a silly example. Shosholoza is a massive song on a big movie like that. Who does that belong to? Or any of those like traditional things that belong to a certain group of people. Do we protect those things, and can those people then begin to earn, royalties out of those? I think to land it, we were, as the South African Guild of Actors, to a degree, we were very happy when the bill passed through the 2 stages and went to the president. Now, because I'm on this IPO group, they were like, listen, guys, we need to warn the president. Actually, what he needs to do, the solution, is to reject it and send it back to Parliament for it to get fixed, because that's an actual remedy. People are saying, yeah, change the bill, change the... But it's also, you're right, it will come and bite us in the butt if we don't fix some of the holes that are in the legislation. And on a practical term, I remember as a guild, we were looking for funding to try and design a collecting system, right? So if all these brands, with so many different faces, there's so many different platforms, whether it's going to be played on YouTube, how are we going to collect the money? And, my first question was, how have the musicians done it, right? Like with Samro, how did they begin to collect those royalties and those rights? So every time a song is played on this platform, etc. And when I was listening to your thing, I was like, maybe that's the thing we needed. But in short, for me, yeah, there's some real stories. Lives could have been changed, and I feel like it has to change in our lifetime. And if there's anything, I like what you're saying about just being active citizens in not just complaining in the corners, but actually engaging with government, because government does want to hear from us in terms of what should this piece of law say in order to protect you and its transformation. So that not other people are getting rich off of your idea, your creativity, your piece of property, but that's shared, in all of us getting successful.
Well, I must say I initially would have never announced this in a public platform, that I have absolutely no anxieties around ditching DSTV subscription and taking up Netflix. So I strictly am on a Netflix and SABC diet. And I'm okay with that for now, because of the 2 devils, I can see that this one devil is at least enabling something and shifting the game a little in comparison to what we've come to accept as a status quo. So that's where I'm at right now. And thank you for framing your experience in a way in which I now can make sense of where I put my money and understand the value of what I'm putting money into. And more than that, I'm also, I keep revisiting the scenario of the David and Goliath scenario that Isabel framed earlier on. Like we really, the way in which this industry is set up really sets us up to be the Davids of every scenario of economic exchange that potentially can be of benefit to us. It's very easy for us to find ourselves being shortchanged, and technologies like the blockchain seem to, in principle, seem to be offering us something that really helps us to, that's really starting to shift the power dynamic around these things. And I don't want to phrase a question, because I think there's a lot of us, a lot of you in the audience that might have some really compelling questions and want to already start participating in this conversation. So I'm going to immediately open the conversation to the floor. And please, is there a roving mic? Okay, there is. If we could have the gentleman with the black beanie.
Okay, dumelang kaofela. Yeah, my name is Tabo. I'm a creative solutionist. Yeah, no, but essentially I'm a writer. So whenever I hear these things, for me, it saddens me. But before I start, thank you for this platform, this cultural economies platform. Everyone that's up there, can you please give them another round of applause? You know, and I am totally inspired as one of the people who's in the, what do they call it? Not the blockchain, the value chain. Yeah, the value chain of the whole content creation stuff. So as a writer, you have no say in most things. How these things get forwarded, what are they turning to this and that and that. So the David and Goliath story and this whole panel, all I wanted to suggest that this is too dense, it's too much. If we can maybe consider having a series of such building up to Akukes, maybe if we have one or two more installations, because there is so much that could be unpacked from each individual that spoke. That's one point I wanted to say. And my next point is that being here for me is an experience. It's amazing because having to listen to everyone, especially Sanda, because he works in an industry that I grew up in and stuff. And when I hear the legal stuff and everything, so I see more opportunities in the 4IR space with the blockchain for us, especially writers who never have a say, you know? And then, but this information is so crucial, is so necessary, but I work in the blockchain. And for me to come here was a mission. So I wanted to know if there's any ideas to ensure that these conversations don't end up in the north, they trickle down to the south. That's all, yeah.
I'll take it. We can take another question.
Okay, well, I guess.
Who's hands up? Can we? You can just, because you've got the mic. Yeah.
Sounds like I'll take it. Hi, thank you very much to everyone here. Ikamala Munogwanda Zakia Shabangu, and I'm a digital content creator. So I really loved how this conversation unfolded from the context to the legal framework, to the futuristic element, and then to the current realities that we have. And I mean, as someone who is currently involved in, I guess, the SAFTAs, which the two of you are quite familiar with, we know that this year there was no animation in terms of an award. It was closed because there was not enough entries, which is really sad because of the amount of stories that we have to tell. But also, as someone who's worked in the NGO space for the What If Trust in Diepsloot, I am aware of the fact that there aren't enough platforms for people in the Kasi to have access to distribute content. So I know personally one of my biggest agendas in the SAFTA's platform is to see how we can incorporate digital submissions into the film and television categories because of how broadcasters are really crippling content creators in a number of ways. It's definitely not something that the SAFTAs is open to. It's something that's going to take me quite some time. So I'm welcome to anyone joining me on my case study. And I'd really love to get some of that data. But for me, my statement goes more down to how do we effectively challenge these various stakeholders to actually empower us and to be able to further our efforts using technology and using our ability to create content. Because the biggest thing is we can't just leave that devil alone. The DSTV cannot die. They have so much of our content. Like, they have a plethora of it. They have all of it. I mean, if you think of some of the best shows right now, Mnet, Zansi Magic, One Magic, all of that, that's all owned by DSTV. And I mean, it's really interesting that just yesterday or the day before, they appointed a black woman as their CEO. Putsi Mahanyele, which is really interesting because I want to see how she would actually be empowered to shift that. But I'm more interested in these people here, the people that are watching the live stream on Facebook. How do we create this, I don't know, a cultural community trust, if you will, that plows back into the people that feed to it, you know? So yeah, thank you.
Can we take one more question? The gentleman in the yellow.
Hi, I'm Efiel, and I'm an artist and a writer and a producer. And it's interesting to note the different worlds that we exist in. I'm a digital copywriter as well, but I also do film, and so it lies in between different spaces. I understand the blockchain because that's something else. Whereas with the other stuff that we do, it kind of like gets affected by all this legislation. Do these things exist in the same world or they're in a different world? And how do we connect the dots for us to be as safe as we can with the content that we produce without being exploited? And how is the shift between the traditional and digital supposed to be kind of like communicated to the rest of other people who are not here and who cannot hear all these things in one platform? Because I think these discussions have been had in different platforms, and to kind of like have the opportunity to see these things being talked about in the same kind of breath is quite phenomenal, I would say, because it creates different thought patterns. So my question is, how do we bridge the gap?
Okay, just to summarize those three questions, and then we'll continue with the rest of the floor's questions. Well, the first one by Khafelo was more of a comment. I don't know whether anyone wants to respond to that, but it was speaking to the effect of how this conversation is really quite inspiring for him, and also provoking us to think about how we extend this conversation beyond these spaces, and it starts trickling down into other spaces where we don't often pay much attention to. So I don't know whether that you are looking for a response, but rather for us to consider that. Okay, and then the next, okay.
On that, I think the live stream on Facebook is a step towards that. There are lots of community Facebook organizations in the township that if we started communicating this to those platforms, so we have to start adding those onto our databases to ensure that those communities are made aware that such things are live streaming on Facebook.
Okay, anyone want to add?
Just a quick comment on, I think, what this gentleman was bringing up. In fact, I want to throw out a question to the room. As much as I wanted, yes, legislation must force Mnet basically to share in the pie, but where are we going digitally? Like, when, as soon as internet availability and data changes in this country, Instagram use is going to go with the IGTV, and, people are posting already their own content on these digital platforms. Are we ready for that? Because that's where the new economy, I think, is headed, right? Where it's consumer and user. There's no one, to a degree, in between. Although Instagram gets to freaking make money out of 190 people being on that platform all at once. How do we then monetize that for ourselves and begin to model the stuff that we do for where we're headed?
Okay.
Thanks. My response to your question, I think it's Tabo, is we have to drive what we want to hear. So, a lot of us have community radio stations. We have community platforms. But we also need to tell them what we want to hear. Sometimes these conversations stay here because they think, oh, people are only going to want to hear this conversation here. If I host it in my local, community hall, no one's going to come. Well, have it and then let's see who comes, I go and I have these conversations everywhere. I'm always willing to go and have a conversation. But I just find that we stay in these forums because these are the forums that are willing to put the time, effort, money into it. It takes a lot to organize this conversation. And often in our communities, we just don't want to, who's going to do it? You have to do it, you know what I mean? So yeah, I agree with you completely that, we do talk to exactly the same people. But I think we can't always blame the entities that are organizing, because at least they're organized. To your question, it's so funny when, is it Michael? Was speaking, I was like, we are living in two different time zones. Like, you are in the, when you watch a movie and it's like one of those, like what was that Westworld is it Westworld, the series? And when they first started and the people are walking and they're showing, oh, you know, look at this and look at this. And like, they're showing them all these future things. That's what I felt like when I was hearing, because I'm like, this is super amazing, but you are so far ahead of like majority of South Africans. And I think that my then plea is just, it's amazing that, you know, your industry sector, I don't know what you call it, is innovating in this way. I think it will completely change everything about our creative industries and protecting content. I know all I actually knew about blockchain is that there's that company in Cape Town, and they are using it in film distribution to, I don't know if it's called Inoxo or something like that. Yeah, and they're using it in film distribution to not allow people to copy and to distribute. So that was all I knew. I did not know all this other stuff. I don't even game, so. But I think that what I would like plea to your industry sector, or whatever you call it, is just think about like that, like where the person, like my gran, you know, what is your innovation solving in her world, if it can, you know. I don't know that it can, but if there is something for her, because I think that often when we innovate, we leave just so, it's like, it's super amazing, but it competes, and it's just focused on like the North or the West or whatever we call it. We want to be really competitive innovatively, but sometimes we just don't, you know, our solutions don't spread. You had a really good question about legislation. If you could just... Yeah, so I think you said, like, how do we, like, agitate with legislation? And, I mean, we just came, you know, Beyonce came here on a global citizen campaign. And the thought behind Global Citizen is to bombard people with small messages and hopefully affect a change. Like, that's it. So you go on this app and it says, please make this phone call, please send this email, please send this text, please send this tweet to this governor, this person, this person, this person. There is no reason why we can't do the same thing. There is, like, that's why I keep saying legislation doesn't have, policy making shouldn't be thought of as other people's problem. It is absolutely your problem. So I was very encouraged by the lobbying that we had in the copyright bill, but you also wonder, why is it that we only do it for that bill, you know? For the land debate, people like to say it's because I don't understand legislation, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know how to read it. But the land debate, we know it's important, and we don't even care how they're gonna draft it. People have an opinion. Well, this is what you have to do about everything in life. And, you know, it needs to be about, like, thinking about, is it overly regulated? Is it enabling legislation? Those are the kind of ways that you want to be. Legislation needs to serve the people. If there are places that we don't need it, then it needs to dial back, you know? If there are places that we need more, because all of these kinds of legislation, like copyright, they served a need. You know, we've taken them on because bigger companies want to then work in our territories. They say, I can't work there if you don't have copyright legislation. So then we take them on. But then we always need to question, are they serving our needs, you know? A lot of the contention around the copyright amendment bill is actually around freedom of contract. And a lot of stuff, you know, government likes to frame it as if it's going to change everything, but it just sets a default position. It doesn't make a mandatory position for a lot of things. So there's no reason why at the end of the day, someone else who with a lot more power in the contracting can just say, I want to change the default position and here's my contract changing it. So I think even in the way that we read it and we agitate, we need to say, what do we want to be the thing that no one can negotiate on, and what do we want the thing? And then not to say, completely send it back, because I think that's also lazy on the part of government. There are things in the bill that are urgent in terms of our transformation. I think one of the things, like the resale royalty right, it's an urgent thing for people who are creating right now. And when we send there, I think I said it when I was speaking, is that initially government was looking at one sector. And then suddenly they tried to please every single person because it hadn't been amended since 1978. But that's also really lazy. There's nothing that prevents government from amending legislation in pieces and stages, phases, through regulation. They actually have a lot of tools at hand. And I think why people are cautious to say don't sign it is because there are some real effects that need to happen immediately. There's certain things in the copyright regime that can't go on for another day. So for those people, those aspects that can be signed, for instance, one of the submissions that I think a lot of people agree with is that a lot of South African artifacts are not seen on the internet because of the way our copyright regime is. So we can't have a lot of stuff on Wikipedia. Let's say, I don't know what monument, you can't have it on Wikipedia because of our copyright regime. But that also means that people who are not from South Africa are not exposed to a lot of our world. There's no reason why government can't say, what is the solution for that? Can we air that out, and then can we change that? Can we, you know? So I think it's just, we need to say to government, what do we want them to do? What is urgent, what is not? And yeah, hopefully that changes.
Cool. So what Thabo said about rural areas getting education and like inspired by all this. So I'm from Cape Town. There's a company called Heavy Chef. So they're entrepreneurial talk show kind of like this, where people come and inspire each other. And it branched off eventually to Khayelitsha. So they actually bring people to Khayelitsha, entrepreneurs, inspiring guys from that region to kind of like get up and do some amazing stuff. And one of the stories that came out of there was, I don't know what the company's called, but essentially they employed a bunch of female adults from Khayelitsha to make cookies, essentially. And it's actually sold in stores all around Cape Town, so you're supporting them through this whole initiative. And with the blockchain stuff, you brought up how can this be taught to like your grandmother or something? How would they be able to use this whole new kind of tech? Unfortunately, I don't think it will go to that stage because America's taking a sweet-ass time to define what is a security and what is a utility token, which defines if it's a security or if it's going to be an asset that can be transferred, such as art assets, music, all that kind of stuff. So Japan, Malta, and other multiple countries have already started to have these regulations in place, and America's getting left behind very quickly. And if they don't hurry the fuck up, China and Russia are going to steer ahead, and it's going to be a big thing. The technology for blockchain, I don't think it's going to be around here until the next probably 5 to 10 years. But with that said, if you give a kid this iPad, he knows his way around there way quicker than I would have done it 5 years ago, or my mother would, or your grandmother would. Kids are learning and digesting information way quicker than we ever could, right? So when things start becoming microtransactions, becomes the norm for them, it's just going to become the way of life. The same way when your grandmother didn't have Visa or MasterCard or card tapping, that's all new crazy-ass tech. But where I see things happening is micropayments, because when you got paid per month, that was because the old bank system couldn't manage too many transactions at a time. So you got paid per month, and all your accounts came off per month is because of the slow, sluggish bank system. So a company called Ripple who does transactions in 4 seconds, right, cross-border. So Western Union would take 5 days, take 20% of your money that you're sending over cross-border. So when the poor rural people are throwing away 20% of their income on these transaction fees to send money back to Ghana or wherever it may be going to, whereas with Ripple, I just push one button, I send it to you, and it costs a fraction of a cent. It costs absolutely nothing. It's practically free. And there's no cuts. It's just push and go. And 4 seconds is there. So the world's going to go in a very fast-paced platform. And I think you brought something with artists, what was it? Transactions that you would get remuneration. There's already a company called Brave on the web browser where you would pre-fund your accounts with, for example, like $5. And you can go through your entire web experience without seeing a single advert at all. and it'll just take small fragments of that $5 to pay the content provider of it. So if you only read a paragraph, you're paying just for that paragraph. And that's already in place now. It's alive. You can download the Brave browser and it's all there. So in the next 5 years, that's just going to be you walking to a store, pick up some groceries, walk out, and it's all done. China has that stuff. That fast, instantaneous payment system will happen for artists. For example, if I go to a concert, I don't have to pay for the go to concert. I can walk in. My account will be linked to this event, and while I'm there the whole time, it'll take transactions. So if I say the whole time, I'm paying my 500 rand to be at the concert. Say half the time, I leave halfway, this guy sucks ass. I leave, you pay 250. That kind of thing. It's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, for the hackathon that we're having at Fagugezi this year, the success of it is going to be the Brains Trust that form part of that. So so I'm inviting all of you and many of you to come and form part of that Brains Trust where we hack these problems through, and then the geeks kind of go on forward for the next 24 hours looking for solutions. So yeah, I'd like to invite you on that. And on the issue of access to the townships, we can talk later after this. As Animation SA, part of my strategy is looking at a whole cradle to career strategy that looks at addressing all of these issues, because government has cancelled a lot of art in government schools, which has a huge impact on our industry going forward. So we have to design interventions that start to address that. But once again, the more volunteers we have, the more support we have, the more we can take the strategy and start fundraising for it and really get the kind of support to have the impact that we want to have. So definitely get onto all your industry boards and organizations and do your bit, because all democracies, to be able to succeed, it's active citizenry that helps it move forward.
Okay, just to add to a point that you already, the question that you threw in at the panel around whether we will, the technologies that we are engaging with are really applicable to some of our communities who are kind of out of the loop with this information or out of the loop with these technologies. And my direct experience of that is that we don't really need to have an answer for that, because it will happen naturally on its own. Case in point, a few years ago, my mom would constantly misunderstand how data worked and the distinction between data and airtime. Now she's become a guru of which applications to switch off. So it's one of those things where when the technology really starts to function in their world, the understanding will come along with it. So we don't need to harbor too much on ideas of explaining it, and in order for people to understand it, when it is in application, it will resonate. Yeah, so just to open it up to another round of questions, can we have the gentleman in the scarf?
Hi guys, my name is Dale Deacon. Thank you all for fantastic speeches. I really enjoyed them and I learned a lot. I've got two very simple questions that I'd like to pose to the group. I think Ajoa mentioned, what was it, plain language in law. I think that's something that really frightens people away from engaging with law. So I'd love you to elaborate on that point, and maybe just to share any South African initiatives in that space would be great to know about. And I think the other major point that I really am very curious about is the adoption of Ethereum. I think, Michael, that might be more aimed at you, but what are the major milestones that you're keeping an eye on when it comes to the rollout of Ethereum in particular? Because I know smart contracts is that major benefit there. So thanks.
Next hand, can we have, there's a gentleman with the glasses, and then we'll have this gentleman in the gray after it.
Hi everybody, my name is Sarai, and I'm the creative director and founder of a bespoke agency called Lobelo Creative Lab. We assist brands position themselves for a Pan-African market, global brands, and inversely assist local brands position themselves for a global market. I want to, I guess, offer a challenge and make this platform and this forum more practical. Can I put an idea that we've been raising money for through this process? Because I think it'll tick all the things that we should be looking out for. And in exchange, I'm willing to contribute to all of your causes with our expertise. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Sack, and thank you for the presentations. I'm an independent researcher. I'm linked to WITS, the Wits City Institute, and I've actually just done a study for the German government on the creative and cultural ecosystem of South Africa, which was, and so the Goethe Institute is one of the clients as well. But just, I was in the National Department of Arts, Culture, Science and Technology from 1997, and the amendment to copyright started around 2000. And we were banging heads against the DTI then, and a complete inability to get any traction. And I was always interested in the viewpoint. I remember the man, I'm not going to say his name, who was in charge of it at DTI, and his attitude was, no matter what we get wrong, doesn't matter, we'll fight it out in the law courts. So, and of course what has happened in the last 18 years is that the domains have become more complex because there are these 9 domains within the UNESCO framework, within arts and culture, so never mind all the other kinds of issues that arise. So hence, you've got a 90-page or whatever it is, white paper. You can't take 9 domains and reduce them to 6 pages. It's a problem, it's a real challenge with the creative and cultural ecosystem, that it's complex. It's not tourism. It's not the tourism industry. This is a complex set of factors. But just that you understand that there's been this very long history, and there could be an argument from the DTI to say to the president, hang on, we've been at this for years. You know, we've got to bring this to an end. It certainly isn't 2 years. There might have been a new impetus in the last 2 years, but this thing has been going on for a long, long time. So that's just an observation. The issue around blockchain, okay, and so I'm new to blockchain, but to kind of try and problematize and understand this beast. Now, we know that intellectual property, there are many people in the world who will say, get rid of intellectual property entirely, you know, just because there is so much protection of knowledge. And if you look at other sectors, particularly big pharma, etc., the way in which intellectual property is then protected and used for the benefit of the rich, and we're unable to benefit. But I'm like, so I've got an idea that I'm working on, and I put that idea onto a blockchain platform. Now, we know there's not always this notion of a completely original, unique idea. Somebody else has got the same idea as me. I've loaded this thing on blockchain. That guy is dead, okay? Because what worries me about blockchain is that there's a potential tyranny involved in a system that is so much determines now this is the point. And also there are multiple blockchains. There's not one universal blockchain. So, and just a final comment about blockchain. If you look at the way intellectual property was protected in publishing, in the old days of publishing, everything you're talking about was covered. You'd look at a book, every single page, whether it was the photograph or the artwork or the text or the designer, every element of it was broken down into a component royalty that would get paid. So it's not like what is happening in the digital space didn't happen in an analogical space. It's just that we're using these new systems. So I think in order to demystify these things as well, I mean, obviously what blockchain is doing critically is this attachment to a method of paying a royalty in a more kind of direct way and in a more kind of micro-measured way. But I think there's we need to understand a lot better what blockchain looks like in a future society in which we're trying to still operate as soft human material and not machine, artificial intelligence material. I think there's a huge potential for a war. Anyway, thank you. The presentations were great.
I believe we do have time for one more question before we close. So if we could have the gentleman in the black jacket.
Thanks. I actually want to expand on Ms. Sachs' question. I'm also from an architecture background, and I think VR and sort of gaming is probably the industry that threatens our industry the most. Specifically because I could put you in any white box and project something to you, and you experience something like that. But I think there's this very interesting sort of exchange between the real world and the analog. And the digital, I mean. So the analog world and the digital. And I think, Susanda, that also speaks to you being digitized, becoming a digital character, and I think that ties into a whole bunch of questions that I have. So I currently work in the music industry, specifically around rights. And that is currently still regulated by the IFPI, which is the rights organization based in France, and it's got a long tradition of organizing that. And then we see this trajectory of all these blockchain technologies, all these cryptocurrencies, trying to sort of circumvent that somehow. Mycelia, you name them. They're all there. The question is, in a world where something like Google or Facebook or whatever is bigger than the GDP of most countries, who controls that? How do we centralize those things? And then secondly, how do we incorporate the consumer who also enters into the production of that art? Because I think in the digital sphere, what's happening is that there isn't a one-directional thing where you have a creator who creates something and a consumer on the other side. There's a dialogue, and they both have a right to that simultaneously. And how do we value that? So I think there's something around that that's really difficult to answer, specifically if we don't have a centralized way of organizing all of that. Thank you.
Okay, good stuff. Okay, so to me, and many can agree with me, blockchain doesn't solve all the problems. It's not, you don't just put everything in the blockchain because it's a cool new buzzword. The things I brought up there are just ideas that's been floating around. People have this whole, so like these Bitcoin maxis that just believe that everything needs to be decentralized and screw the banks, and this whole dystopian future where everything is owned by people and there's no need for intermediaries. In some degrees, yes and no. When you brought the point about the different blockchains, so for example, if someone's playing built on the Ethereum blockchain, someone's built on the EOS blockchain, there are platforms like Ripple has built a platform, but everything communicates with each other. So everything can be cross-platformed with different blockchains. There's no difference to going to visit Facebook or go to Google. It's all on the internet, on the web. So you all can just browse through one central place. Okay, there's so many questions I need to try and remember what they were. Do you have them? Ah. Yeah, I mean, it's still all this is very infant, so like there is no set definitive anything in the blockchain space. Like I said earlier, America can't get their shit together to even stipulate what's what.
Can I just add quickly, sorry, before you finish? More specifically, this whole balance between, does blockchain enable us to protect ideas, or is it more of a question around the use of ideas? What is blockchain really doing then in that sense? Because is it stopping us from creating? Because now if I've created something that looks like somebody who's in Spain has created, we've never met, but now we've created something which is exactly the same. Yeah. How does that become a part of this complex conversation?
Yeah, well, I definitely know the answers for all this because I make games. But as you said, in the old days, they had an RP ledger of everything that had. So essentially, blockchain is just taking that and digitizing it, the same way that you would have a phone book with friends that became Facebook. Same with MySpace, that was the old version of that, and someone made it better. So this can keep evolving and then carry on going. I'm not in the RP space, so I don't have all those answers. But I do know that I think blockchain just enhances that for a digital age. It doesn't essentially, I wouldn't be able to defend it.
Okay, can I just then point a question that came directly for you around elaborating on which organizations are doing the kind of work that you did mention around legal framework being simplified, being reduced, and in the same breath, could you maybe respond to what Stephen also provoked in what he was saying, these things cannot be reduced. So maybe you could respond to both those questions in one.
Quickly jump in there to say, I think that's definitely a Fago Gesu conversation, but to have the policymakers in the room and some of the lobbyists that have been busy over the years, I think is definitely, yeah, sorry.
I did just want to say something really quickly, sorry, and I can't help myself. So that's a plan to, Isabel has come with the idea to bring blockchain, to think around blockchain for the creative industries into Fagogears. And we're planning a series of panels that will bring government and people in policy. And it was really interesting to hear your positions around lobbying, and I don't think that's really dealt with enough at all. Is this working? Yeah. But I just wanted to say one little thing about what Steve was saying and your response is that I think, Steve, there's this conflation between blockchain and trademark, which are different. So it's not making copyright and like labeling something and trademarking it. Blockchain is basically, it's more like a ledger than that. So the ability to be able to log a project in a ledger the same way as the cover of a book is pretty much what blockchain is doing. And if somebody made another book in Spain, it would be the same. So the ownership, it's really about documenting process more than anything else and the people that are involved with that. So the understanding that also probably needs to be made clear. And then the other thing, I shouldn't be responding because now I feel like I'm in the panel because I'm sitting in front. But one of the things that I'm really fascinated by is consumer ownership. And you were talking quite a lot about Netflix. And Netflix basically decides what films to make based on what people are watching and how they are watching. So we basically are, we're producing quite a lot for them based on our own behaviors. And I'm quite fascinated by the future of that as well, but that's just a personal thing anyway. But yeah, we will be engaging this further, hopefully, that was the original.
Okay, well, the first is that plain language is a movement. It's quite old, actually. It's already changed the face of a lot of contracts. So you won't see any more, well, you shouldn't be seeing. A lot of people are contracting off of stuff that they picked up on the internet, which often hasn't been changed. But if you're going to your average legal consultant, most people, their LLB, they would have done it learning plain language. They would have done exercises deconstructing like old contracts and ways of writing into plain language. So it's not a South African thing, it's a worldwide movement to make sure that people know what they're getting into, people understand what they're agreeing to. You have a lot of courts that have, in the public interest, not followed the letter of a contract because they see that people didn't understand what they were getting into. A lot of our marketing practices have changed because people don't understand. So it's just a movement to say what people read, they should be able to understand without having a lawyer in the room. And you're increasingly seeing people then draft legislation or at least ask for legislation that says, especially with copyright, because we don't have an American court system where everyone can just easily go to the courts and doesn't need like tons of money. We're hoping that this copyright tribunal will provide a form of access, but we don't know if it's going to be high cost as well. So you want something that in a regime where we know that people don't have access to the legal system, you can't have a document that needs access to the legal system. That's basically what I'm saying. But yeah, plain language isn't new. It's actually something that most people are already doing. To your statements, when I say that it started 2 years ago, I mean that's when Parliament took this bill and started this particular consultation process for this particular bill. And most of what they have in this bill is what we've seen over 2 years. So I don't know about the previous, but I was there at the beginning, and there's like copy-paste. Most of the bill is like copy-paste of different people's submissions. You can actually say, oh, that was this visual arts network, that was this, that you can actually see it as close as that. So I'm sure if it had blockchain technology, you would actually see it. So that's what I mean, is that in this particular bill, they haven't really aired out those points. They've taken maybe 3 consultation sessions, and there's certain places you can see the clause, like word for word, that's what it is. In terms of policy statements, it doesn't need to be 90 pages. There are places in the world that do have a direction, and that's what we're saying. The white paper already has gotten stuck because every time that they're ready to pass it, it's obsolete. You know, it's writing in detail about what we need in terms of how many venues and how many this, but if we're not making content that needs to be in a venue, then that becomes obsolete. So all that's saying is the white paper should rather be a policy direction to say 30 years, where we're trying to get to, and then any other implementing instruments need to be measured against that policy direction. And if it's a direction, then it really doesn't need to be a granular statement of 90-something pages. That's what I'm saying.
Because an answer one question that you asked about the Ethereum. So Ethereum needs to, hurry the hell up because they've been very delayed on their promises. Scaling is a big issue in all blockchains. Like the blockchain space is literally like Internet 1.0. It is super infant. No one knows where it's going, what it's about to do, how far it can go. But most of the blockchain stuff like Ethereum has so many barriers to entry to get, example, for a game to work. Like CryptoKitties, you had to get a MetaMask extension plugin for your browser to be able to deposit your Ethereum, to be able to buy this cat and breed it, and then sell it for $100,000 if you really wanted to. The only company I found that came close to it was that company Engine, which I couldn't remember on here, where literally on my app, I can open up, log into any game that it supports Engine, and all my gaming assets will be on here, which would be allowed to be cross-platform. And at the same time, I can then sell those assets, create my own assets, and even melt them down to get back Engine coin, which I can then sell for fiat, which enables all users to actually resell their old items and stuff. So Engine's the only use case that I've found so far that's kind of broken 1 or 2 more barriers that Ethereum hasn't been able to do yet. But there's still 1 or 2 barriers that need to be broken with Engine, which will, I'm sure, come next 1 or 2 years. That's it.
Okay, and that wraps it up for the evening. I'd like to, first of all, thank our panelists who have really presented an amazing body of ideas that have been very provoking and a lot to work with and a lot to really reflect on. So if we could all just give our panelists a hand of applause. And this is not to say that the conversation ends here. Definitely, Goethe is the next iteration of this. We're going to expand on the conversation in more complex ways and respond directly to some of your suggestions that you put on the table. But please, if you could all keep in tune with, tuned into that platform and all the different conversations that will be unfolding in September. So keep your eye out on that, well, keep updated on that space. And I suppose that's it for us. And if you could also just remember to contribute to these little posters on the wall and engage with what the questions are really are framing and reflect and just, yeah, respond however you feel or think. So thank you for that, and that's it for the night.